Don't want that. You're looking very dapper.
If I knew I was going to be filmed.
Oh, did you not know?
I would have want something on
I'm
top
already
of it,
doing a
anyways.
terrible job then, aren't I? I should brief. Yeah, but that is what is going out there.
That's fine.
A constant reminder of my bald head and how my hair's falling out.
Well, I was going to say, constant reminder of my little bald patch there as well, which is starting to come on, yes.
Well, you've got it covered.
Well, just about. For maybe for another year or so.
Yeah. Well,
is that better? You're not catching it in the light at all, are you? In the way, so we need to change the studio lighting.
I had a little. I said to them, "Is there anything you can do about the lighting off there? Because it's bouncing off the top of my head." And they just looked at me as if saying, "No, you're going bold. Just accept it." So I'm trying to accept it now.
Okay. Well, it's one of the things we all have to deal with.
Well, not everyone, and yeah. So for some
everyone
reason,
at some point must lose hair. It comes down to it. I mean, it's a very male thing, isn't it? And obviously, alopecia is a massive issue when it comes down to it. Yeah.
Different, yeah. But some guys, for some reason, like I was 35. Some guys their hair falls out when they're 18. I can't say I'd like that when I was 18. It took me through. I've just about got over it now. It took me 3 years just about to handle the fact now. I feel much better with hair. I feel more attractive with hair. Confident with hair.
Really? You look amazing.
Thank you.
No, I mean,
you should have seen me with hair on.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Well, no, you see, but you got the beard. You see, that's the thing as well.
Well, that was my negotiation thing. It was like, okay, your beard's not the best, but if you're not going to have any hair on your head, at least get some facial.
I quite agree. Facial hair is absolutely. Otherwise, it can be a little bit like a football type of thing.
I look ill without any hair.
Really?
I feel so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's perception, isn't it? Versus reality.
Got a lot of hang-ups in life, mate, haven't we? None of it really matters, but yeah,
it all matters. It all matters to us. Matters to how we project ourselves, how we are with other people, how we feel about ourselves. You know, all those things. It totally matters. It's just that we shouldn't have to give so much of a care about it when it comes down to it.
You can swear on this podcast, mate. You can say anything you want, by the way, on this podcast. I should probably get that straight from the off. Yeah, you can say whatever you want. Have you checked out any of the podcasts that we do?
Yes, yeah. I've had a good listen to it. It's fantastic, yeah.
Oh, good.
Doing a great job. Great job.
Thank you. Well, I'm very excited to speak to you. One, because you've got a really interesting career and background, half of which I'm not quite sure what it is. So I'm really excited to pick your brains. I'm a bit of a dummy when it comes to digital strategist.
Yeah.
If that's still the right title that I'm calling you. But it was actually your TEDx talk that really grabbed me. I mean, I'm fascinated by the topic anyway, because I get caught in that trap, and I see my friends and family caught in that trap. And it grabbed me, and it was local, and I thought, I really want to speak to you, and I really want to learn from you. And I want to know what prompted you to do that talk as well, because you're in that kind of industry, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, so Kimberly and Craig and all the volunteers at TEDx do an amazing job, right, to make it local, and they want local people to talk about global issues. And the theme which they chose for that TEDx talk was about home. And I think it was Craig sort of prompted me to talk about, what about if your smartphone is your new home? What about if it's a situation whereby we live now in this device rather than thinking about it as our physical home or the likes, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Hardy. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed.
Let's get your tea before you carry on. Yeah, thank you very much. I will.
On your back.
The staff are on me here. Let's get your tea sorted, Ross, and then we can crack on, mate. Cool. I believe they've got your Earl Grey. So enjoy. Yeah, so the topic was home.
Yeah, so the topic was home, and so I thought that, there were lots of people talking about really important issues about, refugees and about how they were dealing with the concept of having transitory homes and everything. But one of the things that my background is digital, right? So I've spent 25 plus years in digital stuff, doing digital things. And what amazed me was, when the smartphone was launched, it fundamentally changed how people interact, not just with people outside, but how they interact in terms of their connectivity and how much time we were spending on this device. And that seemed to be an interesting topic to go and talk about with regards to is the smartphone our new virtual home? So that's where the idea came from, basically. And then there's loads and loads of positive things. I work in the industry. I keep on saying there's loads of positive things about the smartphone and what it's done and the applications and all of this brilliant stuff. But yet there's a lot of negativity as well with any sort of tectonic shift in terms of technology. we see both positives and negatives come out of that. And I thought I wanted to explore the fact that people I knew, friends, colleagues, were struggling to switch off from the smartphone, struggling to spend more time in the real home rather than in their virtual homes on their smartphones. So the idea of that was trying to explore how you could begin to counter some of those things. And it's basic behavioral science, how you start to change your behavior and change your habits, because this piece of technology has changed all of our habits.
Did you come up with the conclusion of which wins? Is it the upside that's winning or the downside that's winning at the moment?
It's individual, isn't it? It comes down to how you interact. I mean, as I say, I couldn't leave my life without my smartphone. I do my work from it. I do video calls. I read my newspapers. I buy things from it. I play games on it. It's fantastic. But the question is that the only thing I'm doing? And what does it make me feel when I'm interacting with that device and the applications on that device? So I said in the talk, it's not the device's problem here. It's the fact that applications on that device have led us to change our habits, and some of those are negative towards our mental health. Some of those are negative towards the way in which we apportion our time, the way in which we apportion our values. And that's the issue you've got to be able to look at and see how can you begin to start to unravel some of those negatives.
Yeah, it's a very complex topic. There's lots of reasons why we spend too much time on our phone. There's lots. I'm not even sure people are aware. I think this is the danger, how much time they spend on it. Therefore, it's like trying to fix a problem that they can't even see, which I think is the most concerning thing. So when I go to the gym, for example, I look round and, everyone does have their head in their phone, but they're oblivious to the fact they're doing it. I think that's what concerns. And by the way, I'm no better than anybody else. I just seem to have worked quite hard to protect myself because I saw what I was doing. When I'm lonely, I catch myself on my phone. When I'm bored, I catch myself on my phone, and trying to battle with that. And it does feel like a constant battle. That's the thing. I've won some battles, but the war I eventually seem to lose. It creeps back in slowly.
Yeah, but the point is about realization of that time that you spend, right? That's the important thing, is about being aware. If you're aware of it, then at least you can, assess it. But if you're not aware of it, and it's just become, the constant drumbeat and rhythm of your life, then you have a problem. I mean, one of the interesting things was that you talk about time there, amount of time spent. When I did the talk back in 2017, and back then I just used some general stats across the adult population that on average we were spending 2.5 hours on our phone, and if you were a heavy user, about 3.5, maybe coming up to 4. And it's on the YouTube, all the comments are sitting there saying 2.5 hours, that's amateur. I'm there for 9, I'm there for 14 hours on their base. And that was quite scary. Now, I looked up this morning and I tried to find some of the most relevant stats for, say, 2022. On average, from one survey, and I don't know how statistically significant it is, but statistics all come with caveats on them. 4.5 hours is the average now.
Okay.
So that's gone. That's nearly doubled basically. So if you're a heavy user using 8 or 9 hours, right, and then you've got to look at. So you've got to be aware of the amount of time you spend. Then what is that time being spent? If that time is just listening to music or something, then it's just shifting, right? It's shifting what you do on another device, just shifting to you, basically. We would have had Walkmans and Discmans and all those things, and we all listened to them. We never thought about the amount of time we spent listening to music, right? And that's often, a lot of mental health and positive behavior comes out of listening to music, right? It's been proven again and again. But again, and playing games or watching Netflix, again, that's just shifting from watching on a TV or on a games console and everything and moving it into a different device. That's the stuff I'm not so worried about. It's reading newspapers, again, just shifting, even shopping, shifting. What that does though is it changes. If we start to do only that on the device, then there's a problem. And that problem fundamentally lies in the fact that we ignore the other things that we used to do. So if we're gathering with friends and chatting around things, what happens to the physical aspect of that if you're just doing it virtually? If you're playing games, is that games is a very highly social thing quite often, because distance means that friends groups can't play together on the basis. But what does that mean in terms of that going out and socializing with your friends on the basis? And even going out shopping, shopping is actually quite a social thing when you're shopping with friends or with family. How does that impact if you're only buying, clicking, and purchasing on Amazon, right? So some of this is just shifting from other devices in terms of the time we spend on our phones. Some of it is the work that we have to do on our phones, right, and answering messages and the like. And then some of it is part shift and then part replacement of what we're doing on our phones versus the physical world. And that's the bit I'm a bit worried about, because that's where you can start to gain a little bit more alienation, a little bit more internal, how can I put it? Internalization, really. You start to move into yourself, and you're still communicating with people, but it's all done virtually. And we know 90% of all communication is non-verbal. It's body language. It's that you can't read empathy through a message. You can't, you can put an emoji on there. You can't read empathy in the same way. So that's the question: is how it's changing us as people, as we start to not just all the stuff that we shift over, which is fine. I've got no problems with the time being spent on that, but it's the application of stuff which takes us away from our normality of being physical with people.
Makes total sense. One of the reasons I started the podcast was because I forgot how much I enjoyed and learnt from a conversation where there were no other distractions. That's the biggest danger for me, or what I feel like it's the biggest battle, is my ability now to focus on one thing at a time, concentrate on one task. So music used to be a great thing where you'd go and put on a CD and you'd listen to music, and it kind of felt separate. Like you say now, the screen time's gone up, but it makes sense because Spotify's on my phone and things happen and things change. So you merge all these things together. But I still get much more enjoyment and pleasure and fulfillment when we are having this conversation and the only thing we are doing is talking to each other. If we were talking now and I was checking my phone in between because there's things to do, it takes away from the quality and the present moment, which is something you kind of point out in your talk.
That concept of connectivity,
yes.
Right? That concept of being together and having a conversation and reading each other's reactions to things and the likes, that is a very, very different way of having a conversation. And trust is enhanced when we're physically together and having a conversation. You can read into people much, much more. You can understand when they're feeling isolated or hurt, or they find something incredibly funny and sarcastically versus that. It's very difficult to do that with perfunctory conversation that happens directly through that. But even music has changed, right? So you say put on a CD. I'm old enough now to remember putting on an LP.
Yeah, I've
right?
got the vinyl about.
Right? And albums were created by artists in order to be able to be a journey that you go through and you listen through, and then you get to the end of side one, flip it over to side two, and you go through that way. It was a journey, and you could spend 50 minutes, an hour and a half, or whatever in that journey with that artist. What Spotify's done is, of course, it's given us massive accessibility and massive opportunity to discover new artists, and it does an incredible job of that. But the actual tracks themselves are getting shorter and shorter because the incentivization for artists is per stream, to be paid per stream at a very, very low rate. And so in doing so, the length of that song is actually shortening. So you're getting 2.5-minute songs now, which is even shorter than the pop music of the 60s and the 50s. And the concept of an album, well, it's pretty much gone now, isn't it? Because when do you ever listen to an album end to end? And if you do, it's probably shuffled, which probably destroys the whole narrative linear journey of what an LP was trying to do as the artist invented. So things change and things more. I'm not saying it's worse or better. It's just that we should have the opportunity to be able to experience things in a different way, rather than it being packaged in the most efficient manner for us. Because when we seed, and most applications are about trying to make us more efficient in our time and in our enjoyment, so that most of them are trying to maximise to be as small as possible, to take as little time as possible. That's from my work, that's what we do in digital, is try and make things as effective as possible. But in doing so, what you do is you lose serendipity, you lose the option of being able to explore things in different ways, and it becomes a much more instantaneous dopamine hit, rather than sometimes longer, more thinking about things, music being a primary example.
You're absolutely right. I'm struggling to think of the last time I listened to an album from start to finish. But like you say, in the grand scheme, that's not an issue. But it's what it does to your, for me especially, my attention has shrunk, that's for sure. So my ability to focus on tasks for long periods of time. And even to some stage, training podcasts, for an hour and a half, we sit here and we talk, I have to be present and focused, and I want to be. But it's a skill that you can train if you decide to. I think the awareness is the first thing. The thing that I challenge, awareness is, I think it's overrated in terms of it doesn't elicit any change. So being aware that, for example, you eat too much, or being aware that you don't move, it's fine discovering that. However, my next question would always be, okay, cool. So what are we going to do differently? Yeah. And I think that's the battle then that starts with the phone, the way you use it, the way that it's used in your family environment, in society. I would always encourage people to start with their own usage, of course, because let's face it, that's the only thing you can do. I guess my question really now that I'd love to explore is, like, why would you spend less time on your phone? Like, do you think you have to actively find something worth stepping away from the phone for? Do you think you have to find relationships that really encourage you to spend in-depth time off your phone, or perhaps goals, a mission, a purpose that is bigger than scrolling?
Yeah, I think so. I'll go back to it. That if people recognise that they are getting instantaneous dopamine hits off a like, right, or something that they posted on the basis, and it becomes very addictive. And so what we are talking about is the proportion of our life that is spent on the consumption or the interaction with applications on the phone that have an addictive nature to them, right? So be that through driven by ego, or be that through driven by self-actualization. I've seen people be just as addicted to Strava as they are to Instagram or TikTok, right? So it comes down to we talk about awareness. There's a recognition that the time that I'm spending is if that takes away from time I enjoy doing other things, and becomes a majority of the time that I do because of the addictive nature of the application, then there is an issue to be solved, I think. I totally agree with you in terms of that. We should all have missions and goals and ambitions and the ability to be able to achieve those. I think the phone it can often be an incredible catalyst for those. The number of creators that have come out of utilizing video and photos and music on the device itself and change the way in which we create content is a really real positive. But it's when things start to affect you, mostly mentally rather than physically, I would say, although there is a physical aspect of not doing enough exercise or not standing up even, or whatever, or that is going to be an effect of too much phone usage, or indeed crook neck and bowed head, basically. Yep. But it's mostly the mental side of things. And one of the things I put that down to is how in my world there is a thing called dark patterns that certain parts of the industry utilize in order to be able to make a user experience in digital as habitual as possible, because the incentivization for the business to do that is that they find a better way of being able to monetize you, right? So the classic is in social media. The endless scroll is a dark pattern because it never ends and never stops and never finishes, so you'll never be able to put it down. It's not like a physical paper which you can read through and put down, or a book where where you're in it. It's just endless infinity. That is theoretically a dark pattern that leads us to a point of spending more time on there. Why? Because they are selling advertising space based on our activities to people, and so they want you to stay there as long as possible in order that you generate as much advertising. That's the simple fact on a Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or whatever it will be. That's what those businesses do, and that we know from hundreds and thousands of probably studies that can have a very negative effect on you mentally, in terms of your anxiety, in terms of the way in which you view yourself, in terms of the fact that you enter into echo chambers directly through that, because you are constantly fed content that is relevant to the content that you've already viewed. And so in doing so, that personalization creates an echo chamber. So you end up, if you want to go and explore conspiracy theories, suddenly you'll be looking at conspiracy theories. If you want to explore high-class fashion, you'll be suddenly surrounded by high-class fashion. And in doing so, that means that we start to narrow down our fields of vision and start to judge ourselves in different ways because of the type of content that we are consuming. And that's the addictive pattern that needs to begin. You need to start to be aware of and recognize that you might be spending too much time on that. And so a lot of the stuff I talked about in 2017 is still relevant today. So it is about, go and, Apple, Google, they all have screen time applications. Go and look at how much time you're spending, and then look at that over a week, then look at that over a month, and start to think, is, an hour a day on Instagram, it's not a problem. Well, that's 7 hours a week, that's nearly 30 hours in a month type of thing, right? That's 2 to 3 working days that you've spent scrolling through Instagram. It might well be that you've got a great deal of enjoyment out of that, but it starts to move to 2 hours or 3 hours or 20 minutes if you're doing 10 minutes. All those things are ways to be able to recognize that the way in which you're spending your time, we have, what was it, a book said that you have 4,000 weeks, I think it's called, the book.
Oliver Burkeman, yeah.
Oliver Burkeman, yeah. 4,000 weeks. I'm about halfway through it. And I agree with you. Great book. 4,000 weeks on this earth. So now you can start to work out what do you do with your time in that.
Yeah.
And that comes down to that. You're right, you say about, it's not just about awareness, it's about doing something about it. But you have to recognize that time that you're spending might not be the most valuable of time to spend.
Sure. I think that's the danger. I think the needle has shifted. So I think new normal is to spend 3 hours on your phone. Oh, it's less than average. No problem. And I think it can almost allow us to live life with our eyes closed. So by the time we're 68, we might wake up and go, oh, fuck. I've spent my entire life with my head in my phone. So I think, and again, how you drag people into an awareness state, I don't know. You've made some great points. Like there was 5 points out of the talk, like logging your usage. I think that's great advice because you see it in black and white. And a lot of people, there would be a lot of fear with that. Oh my God, I've got to look at this. It's like when I ask someone to write their food down, it's like it's real. Like you have to actually write down what you're eating, and it no longer becomes something you can just push to the side. So in therapy, Ross, we're always taught like whatever you can't see will hurt you. When you can see it in front of you, you've got a chance now of doing something with the information. So I think that's great. But I think there is an overriding challenge for a lot of guys, especially middle-aged guys who might feel like they're in a 9 to 5. They don't feel like they've got any new career opportunities. This is my life and this is what I'm going to do until I'm 65. I think there is an underlying kind of boredom factor of like, what else can I do with my time that would drag me away from my phone? And I think you have to work hard on that, whether it is found in relationships. Because I know that my best times in my life have not come through sitting with a mobile phone. They've been out adventure and exploration and achievement, physical achievements and things like that. They've really given me reward. And I know that my best times are not found in my phone. So I have to constantly coach and remind myself of this. Because my comfort, my inner desire is to go to the phone. It's easy.
Yeah.
Like you say, it's instant dopamine.
You get probably more dopamine out of going for an hour's walk around the countryside than you probably get out of playing a game on your phone.
But it's a hell of a lot less effort to grab the phone.
Yeah.
And especially if you're in an unhealthy habit of waking up and just reaching for your phone, that's probably the day set for you then. I'm huge into what you do in the first 5 minutes of your day is critical.
Very much so. I mean, one of the things I said in the talk was, don't sleep with your phone.
Yeah.
Because you'll spend more time on a screen at night than you need to, and then there's a chance that you haven't switched your notifications off and you get pinged the whole time on it, because we have to now be for our work, we have to be so much more available than we were beforehand. Everyone talks about email deluge. I can remember 25 years ago, we get phone calls, but we might get letters, but we never had the same deluge of communication that we have now. And the fact that you feel that you have to be available for it, else somehow you are not fulfilling your requirements to the work and the culture. So that's, I think, for your middle-aged man, working and everything, there's a feeling that there's a huge amount of demand on time still from work, and that work-life balance, unfortunately, falls apart if you have the same phone for both work and home. And even if you do, you've got to catch up on everything that you've got on your personal phone versus what you've got on your work phone. So that's a big issue, right? to really start to do that. But what you're talking about is what are the tiny habits that start to do things. So not having your phone by your side doesn't means you don't pick it up within the first 5 minutes in the morning, basically, in bed. And that means that you're not then starting to get anxious over messaging or stuff that's happened or whatever in the base, and you can get a chance. You can have a nice glass of water and feel right for the day. But that's one. That's like the tiny habit of, if you want to go to the gym, you have to put your trainers outside by your bed, basically, and your clothes out by your bed to make sure that that's what you get into first, so you can get to the gym, right? Those tiny habits. There's a great, one of the primary sort of innovators of behavioural psychology in habits is Professor B.J. Fogg at Stanford University.
Fantastic book, yeah. Him and James Clear have done the 2 best books, I believe, on habit formation. Yeah,
I think Tiny Habits is a really good one. I haven't read James Clear's one.
Oh, Atomic Habits. Yeah, it kind of stole the limelight, and then I discovered B.J. Fogg's work, and that was prior to James Clear, and it was fantastic. Yeah, it was pretty much James Clear's shined it up, polished it, and made it sound a bit sexier.
Well, you look back into, and this is all third hand, so I don't know how true this is, but his course at Stanford in habit formation was the most attended course, in particular by a lot of the Silicon Valley sort of grandees, basically. So it's said that people like Kevin Systrom from Instagram approached that, and in fact, when Facebook first launched and the ability to build apps on there, he got his classes to build apps to create habits, and suddenly people recognized that they could make money out of these habit formations and everything. And so that sort of led to that early wave of, I suppose, 2005 onwards to 2010 in terms of the rise of social media and how that became ever apparent, because it's built on those habits. In fact, there's a book called Hooked, which was again written by one of the attendees in the Stanford class. I can't remember the author's name. It's Near. I can't remember his surname. But that was basically, how do you create habit-forming digital applications?
Sure. I think building that aware. I've always found if I'm trying to change something in my life, a deep understanding of what's going on is helpful. So I've read a lot of books. Brainwashed is one. There's many that are, and Deep Work by Cal Newport, very good. They kind of explain what's going on, and they explain things like you've just spoken about, like that. Facebook want you to spend more time on there, and it's worth knowing that. They don't want you just checking in and then checking out. So knowing that is their objective is helpful, because you kind of know what battles you're facing. Then.
Obviously, they also want you to be aware of that. I mean, they will say very publicly that they don't want on there 24 hours a day. They want you to do it in a responsible manner. But it's a bit like responsible gambling. What does it actually mean, responsible, right? Because that's our own interpretation of what responsible is.
I don't buy it, man. I don't buy it. It's like me slapping down a donut in front of you, and you're trying to lose weight, and me going, Ross, I want you to be responsible, but here's a donut, here's some beer, I feel like there's always, the goal is, let's get people on Facebook, let's get people spending. And I think, even if that is a bit cynical, I think it's worth having that view if you're trying to better your relationship with it, just knowing that it's not there for the good of your mental health.
No, it's there. It can, you look at where Facebook came from. Facebook came out of basically early dating. So Facebook was developed out of early dating application, for university students in the States. And then it became a clever way of being able to share wonderful memories through photos. It became a photo sharing site. And then it got taken over by different parties doing different things. And Facebook will claim, this is their cop-out on the basis, I feel, that we're just the platform. We're just the software. We produce the features in order to be able to help developers.
Sure.
That's where the content's not our problem and everything. And you can look at it, but it's a bit like saying a car manufacturer saying, this car which goes at 250 miles an hour and everything, it's not my problem if you're speeding in it, or or a gambling shop on the high streets opening there and saying, well, it's not my fault if you come in and lose your money.
And it's a fair point. I don't think Zuckerberg should be responsible for my personal responsibility of how I use Facebook. I think you should view it like that in any area of your life. It's like, forget the government, forget Zuckerberg. Like, let's have a look at your own behaviour. Because whilst I'm blaming Mark Zuckerberg, what it means is I'm not looking at myself and how I act and conduct myself. So I think the first rule is forget all that, forget the blame. Let's have a look at what you do, because no one makes me pick up my phone. Yes, there's certain things that might draw me in, but ultimately it's on me, and I like that because it means I can do something about it. If it's on Zuck or it's on you, then I'm fucked. Like, you know, I have to wait till you sort the problem before my life changes.
Or the governments, or whatever it might well be. Parties that are not interested in doing it, or the markets or whatever. Yeah,
can't play that game.
None of those will work in your own individual interest. You're absolutely right. It's your individual interests are owned by you.
Sure.
They are influenced by the people around you, but they are owned by you. You have that responsibility, and you have the ability to change things. Yeah,
absolutely. And there's a lot of, you know, humility in reading a book like BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits, and really understanding the importance of them, because I think they're so underrated and overlooked. So my first 2 minutes of the day, I know how crucial that is. I know that if I hit snooze, I'm in trouble. So I've eliminated snooze from my life. You mentioned it, the old-fashioned digital alarm clocks. You know, the phone is downstairs. But that isn't a small thing. That is a big thing. That's everything. So I take these little habits, and I can see how they can compound.
Yeah.
A little bit like you would with a financial plan. Yeah, that £2 that you put away today is nothing, but over 20 years you do that every day. So I see these small habits. I try and have humility and remind myself I'm never too good to be working on these small things that actually change everything, because they all add up, and the way that I feel determines the way that I act too. So I've got to keep an eye on that. My exercise, what I eat, what I drink, it determines who I am, how I act, and how I show up. Determines who I am with the person opposite me as well. You know, if I'm around my mum and dad, for example, if I'm tired, eating shit, dehydrated, grumpy, exhausted, I'm going to be a very different son to the one who shows up, you know, in decent shape, energized, not distracted. So there's certain things you can put in place, which I think a lot of guys will just overlook and overshoot and go straight for the big shit. And it's like, hold on, you're missing the groundwork, you're missing the foundations. And I think it all starts from there. And that's a great book, by the way. I'm glad you brought that up. Hopefully people listen to this, buy it and read it. It's a really good book.
Very good book indeed, yeah. But I'm totally in agreement with that. I think that so many of our actions are unconscious, and that's what we have to address. You know, and you have to address those consciously to understand that they're unconscious actions, right?
Sure.
The negatives and the bases, like, oh yes, having another beer or whatever might well be, you know, just an unconscious action because your friends are there, rather than thinking consciously, oh no, I'll have a glass of water because I've had a couple already, type of thing, right? That's a conscious action you have to take, whereas the easy action and the simple action is to it. And I think that we've got to a certain extent in the world whereby the strategies of the companies and the scale-ups and the startups is all about trying to meet that most immediate need for us and make it as seamless and easy as possible to do that, right? So you can open up a bank account. It used to take you 20 minutes in a bank. It will take you, 20 seconds on Monzo or something, right? So a lot of that is positive because it gives us time back. But at the same time, it starts us to get into habits. We come to expectations about things. I think the other thing that's really interesting there is, the way in which you look at your life and the way in which you have the responsibility and the control over it is very much at that sort of top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in terms of the need for self-actualization, the ability to be able to actually realize that you can fulfill your potential as a human being, as you, right? As right? That is something which is above the levels of ego and the way in which we, obviously the physical needs that we need in order to be able to operate. But that level of ego is what gets fed incredibly well by those applications that have got negative habits around them.
Yeah.
Because they are about accentuating our need to be recognized, loved, acknowledged, all of those things, and they do it in such a way that, as I say, those little dopamine hits give us the ability to be able to start to feel that we are achieving something, when in fact we're not actually achieving our potential at all, because we're doing something completely different than what we should do. And that's the hard thing. The hard thing is about hard things is starting them. The hard things are then being able to be in a position whereby you achieve them. I mean, one of the things that it's interesting. I'm doing dry January. I do it pretty much every single January. It's a nice habit to have on the basis. January comes around, I do it now. It's just natural. But when I look at trying to do New Year's resolutions, everyone, as you say, goes for the stars and doesn't do that. If you introduce something new every single week, So I'm conscious of the fact that I need to drink more water. This week I will drink my 2 litres of water outside of the tea that I drink and everything. That's a conscious decision, but I have to change, a habit that I have to change. And I introduce it for a week, and by we know pretty much the brain very easily slips into that. If you do it 3 times, 4 times, it becomes something that becomes much more unconscious in terms of that's the things that we do. And so all of this comes down to, as you said, the behavioural psychology and the positive tricks that we can do to help us to not experience negativity and start to recognise, the fact that we have potential, we have a limited time, and we have the opportunity to be able to explore that in multiple different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky as a young man. About 22, I met a guy called Jeff Thompson, who taught me the concept of self-sovereignty. So he was like, this is all you should be working on, what you do, how you react, and forget everything else. Your world will become better as you do internally. So I thought, well, that's interesting. That's something I can do because, at points in your life when things aren't going well, it's very easy to go outwards and point the finger and kind of look for reasons why life isn't going how it should. So I was very fortunate in that aspect. And something else, I think some of the things that have worked for me is I try and challenge myself to do things that require me to be the person that I want to be. So I know that, for example, I try and flood my diary with things that, like Mum and Dad Thursday is a common thing now. I see Mum and Dad every Thursday. We go out for breakfast and lunch, and it's something I never used to do, and I love it. But it forces me to turn my phone off and be present with them, just as climbing mountains does, just as a gym does. I think if I try and kid myself and just say I'm going to stay away from my smartphone, and then I'm sat there twiddling my thumbs on the sofa, I'm going to lose the war. So I have to kind of flood my diary or my life with high leisure activities that actually mean something. Because I'm I can future pace quite well, and I know what I'm going to regret at the end of my life. So this whole looking at death as a driver towards good behaviours, some people think it's nuts. It's a bit, it's a bit of stoicism. They remind themselves each day, we're going to die, so what is important? And that has helped me a lot. But having good teachers has been really useful too. And I think lacking for a lot of men. So we did an event last week, Ross. It was great because there was a guy at the head of the table. I ran the event, but kind of, I let him sit at the top of the table. He was 68. He's an Ironman, represented Team GB, an ex-alcoholic. And, he can teach me things about life that I wouldn't know because I haven't experienced it. And then there's me, 38, and there was a 22-year-old in the room, and I'm teaching him things that I know that he doesn't know because he's 22. And I think that's really important too, learning from your elders, passing down the wisdom, because, they can offer you good guidance. And I think that is something that you sometimes don't get out of a book or out of an Instagram video or out of a TikTok video, being around people that can guide and shape what you do, how you act, how you show up, and role models, inspirations. There's a fine line between comparison and inspiration as well. You can find inspirations on social media too, that people that you admire and strive to be like. But to do that and achieve that, you often have to put the smartphone down and replace that with some form of action that drives the behaviours that you're proud to display in your life. I think
you raised 2 really interesting subjects there. One around mentorship and one around the community. So I am all for understanding of that we have total control over what we do, but as long as we also have the understanding of what does that do in terms of impacting others. In terms of what we do, right?
Sure.
So there is a call whereby I think, in general, the communities that we live in, we care less about them now than we used to, and in doing so, one of the most positive things I've ever done is being involved in community activities. So I was part of the people who started up Art in the Park and in Leamington, and that was a big community. Festival, and being connected with people I wouldn't normally be connected with, and being able to experience that and help around that was a really, really positive experience for me. And so I think the community aspect of how we impact on our communities is just as important as how we do, because we don't want to be someone who is just concentrating on ourselves. It becomes very selfish, very sort of Nietzschean, very that's the Superman type of ideal. It also leads, I think, to. It's interesting to talk about the sovereign individual because the whole, not to get into politics at all, but the the whole of sort of the neo-libertarian movement is based around the sovereign capitalist, that global capital systems have crashed around us because of digital media making everything far, far more global. Individual state no longer exists, therefore it's you as an individual that needs to control everything yourself, and that leads to certain aspects which becomes very counter to community, I would say. Everything that we've seen happen in America, everything we see happen with a lot of the current Silicon Valley billionaires, they're not acting in the best interests of the community or the self, but they're taking wealth and operating it as gods almost to a certain extent. So we have to be really conscious that whatever we do ourselves doesn't impact and furthering ourselves that we have a place in this world, that we are part of a community of individuals, right? And in doing so, that we can actively add to that community. And that comes to your point about mentorship, that being able to discuss, pass on, suggest, recommend is all ways of us being able to explore ourselves, but also to help others. And that's one of the biggest things that we can do in a community is to help people in whatever needs that they've got. And that concept of mentorship and finding people who for particular things, we do it a lot in work. We don't. One could argue that therapists are in basis mentors to take us through, guides to take us through things in real life. We have family and friends to help us, and we'll go to those people for the specialist subjects that we know that they're very good at or that they've had experience in and everything. We'll go to them, and online and on our phones we go to communities there to help us to be able to go through. So mentors sort of aggregate experience and curate it down with some form of real relevance to you as an individual, and that is something we need to do more as a community of people. We need to pass these things on, and I think that's, to me, that's my version of self-actualization, of reaching potential, is not just to have control over myself, but able to understand that my very presence, my very being has an impact upon those around me, not just within my immediate circle, but those who are within my local community, those which are in my communities of interest. And in doing so, I need to hold myself and help those communities as much as possible, rather than sort of slipping back down Maslow's hierarchy into that ego mode.
That makes sense to me. The only thing I challenge on that is I only feel ready to help my community now because I've got my own things in order. Yeah. So, but then again, I would argue that throwing myself into the good work of the community could develop my skills, fast track them. Like you have to show up for your community. Great. It gives me a reason. But yeah, I kind of like, and there's a rule that, not a rule, but like a little kind of suggestion that we have in the Better Man. It's like, well, let's do a little bit of work on yourself so that you can be better for your family.
Yep.
And then you can think outside of the four walls of your own home and spread out into the community. And it's nice because it feels like a little bit of a path, like, right, get my own shit together, be nicer to the people that I actually say I love, treat them better with more respect, look after them, take leadership. And then let's step out into the community. And a lot of the guys in the group are now at that stage where they're like, right, I've got things in order. How can I serve at a greater level? But I think there's a real skill in picking a good mentor too. And I don't believe family are the answer. And here's why. Because I feel like, for example, of course, there's mentorship roles. Parents are going to be mentors by definition. But in terms of advice and guidance, I sometimes feel like the people closest to me love me so much, they're probably going to more want to protect me than give me the advice or the direction that I actually need, not want. So if I spoke to you now, Ross, and said I want some help, you probably don't care too much for my feelings because we've just met. So you're probably going to hit me with the direct truth, like you're gonna, yeah. Whereas mum and dad might be like, well, we love my son, we don't want to hurt him, so let's wrap him in cotton wool a little bit and give him the advice that we think is probably best for him right now. Do you know what I mean? So I like my mentor or mentors in my life to speak the truth, regardless of how it's going to make me feel. And I think
that's a fair amount of resilience in you to be able to welcome that, right? I mean, I think a lot of people will find that very difficult when people can't, handling negativity, and my goodness, there's a lot of negativity in every single social feed that we have, right?
Sure.
People handling negativity is a really difficult thing for people.
Is it negativity though? Is the truth ever a negative contribution?
Well, I suppose, yeah. Okay. So is the truth negative? No, but it could make me feel negative. It could make me feel negative about it, and that's very hard, both from the giver and the recipient, to be able to have that resilience to that, right, in the basis.
For the giver too, yeah, for sure.
Completely.
Yeah, it's very hard. I have to remind myself, because I don't want to upset people all day, every day, but I also think I want to help them. What's my best chance of helping them? It's with the truth. So I kind of like to understand that it might hurt, but behind that feeling of pain and potential suffering is the result or the outcome that I want. I had an interesting conversation with a guy today who went to the doctor and he was type 2 diabetic. So there's two options, right? The option was the doctor said, look, take these pills and it will keep control of it. The other route, which potentially you could argue is better for society and the individual, is to say, go away, work out, fix your nutrition, drink your water, come back to me in 6 months, handing the responsibility back to the person with the reversible type 2 diabetes. And that's the kind of thing, it might hurt that individual at the time. You might think, you're telling me that I've got to go and exercise, you're not going to help me. What do you mean you're not going to help me? You know what I mean? But it's kind of like we can look past that and think it's for the individual's best interests.
Yeah, I can absolutely understand that. I think that you've got to. The problem is you've got to know what someone's best interests are, right? And that alignment does take a bit of time to understand people.
Sure.
Because brutal truths are necessary, but need to be aligned with how that individual operates versus how you operate, right? It's like we have a focus group of one every time we look at something. We say, how do we react? And that's the way that we would do it. And then you look at culture, you look at spirituality, you look at focus of everybody else on this, all 7-8 billion people or whatever there are in the world now. You look at that and you see the differences, and so you've got to find a balance of understanding and reading the other person as to know whether that brutal truth is going to be right for them, but also whether that brutal truth is going to be something that they're going to be able to take on board, and adapt to. I'm not saying don't do brutal truths in any single shape or format. It's just that I think you've got to read people before. If you were to come and give me advice now, right, or I was going to give you advice now, it would be completely without context and based on what I perceive as being an answer that I think about, right? If you go and ask 5 or 6 people about that, they'll probably give you the same answer, but likely they'll give you other answers as well. And so it comes down to the basis that our perceptions of what we know is fundamental in how we then give that information over to somebody. Because information is not neutral.
Sure,
advice is not neutral. It comes with bias.
Sure, I think it's different if you just hand me down advice. If I haven't asked for it, then could be the point where I didn't ask for the truth. Yeah. I think if I come to you, Ross, with a question, I think it's your duty. I'm not sure what the difference between truth and brutal truth is. I don't think there's a difference. Like, what's brutal truth versus truth?
Well, there's different. Everything's grey. Nothing's black and white. And what I mean by saying a truth is, you might say, give your example of someone go and work out or whatever. For the diabetes, that example. Yeah. You take that and you say, right, what does working out actually mean? Is it doing it 3 times a week? Is it going off on an hour's walk every year? Is it doing harder cardio? Is it going to be... The truth is, the brutal truth is, to assuage that problem, you're going to need to do some radical thing. You need to lose, 10, 20, 30% of body weight. You're going to need to re-ascertain where your fat levels are versus your muscle levels and everything. You're going to have to do these type of exercises to do this type of thing. That's brutal truth, giving you that way of going forward.
Is it?
The
is
truth,
it brutal?
the truth. Well, no, that mean.
Or is it just truth?
Or is it just a roadmap? Okay. But I think that we are.
Which is kinder.
Yeah,
so which is kinder.
In that case, the brutal truth is kinder, without a doubt, yeah.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah, the delivery might hurt, but is it probably kinder to say to that person, you do need to lose 3 stone. It's going to make your quality of life so much better. You do need to transform your life. You do need to work out 5 times a week. So it might feel like, boom, being shot 3 times. But again, if it's delivered from the right place, like I want to help this person and I need to deliver the truth right here, right now. That could, we could argue that's kind.
Okay, so I'll absolutely buy in that particular case where there is, uniform scientific evidence, that's a good thing to do, right? Yeah. But if you were to say the same thing of, should you split up with your girlfriend, right, and give a brutal, the difference between brutal truth and truth there is very, very different depending on how you perceive them, how your own emotional experience and your own relationships in the past, right? There's no clarity around the information that you can give. There's just an opinion, right?
Sure.
And that's what I mean. The difference is whether you give that opinion, which is hard or soft or dark grey or light grey or whatever comes into it. I mean, I'm not disagreeing that where there is a body of evidence that science and community and everyone, we're educated to a point of understanding that that's a good thing to do. Someone not doing that is silly, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's something we always kind of bring up at the start of any meetings that we have with the guys. It's like, guys, we're going to be honest with each other because we care for each other and we want the best for each other. So there's an understanding and trust. So I think who you get your advice from is important. Otherwise, it can feel like an attack. But it's interesting because there's a story of like one of my friends who got married and the marriage didn't work out. They divorced, and his best man after the divorce said, "I knew it wasn't going to work out." Yeah, because she wasn't right for you. And the guy who got married said, "You're my best man. Why didn't you tell me at the time that you didn't think she was right for me?" And I thought that's such a complex situation. Like, I don't think the best man was in a position to win there. One, love makes you blind, and two, he didn't ask. So it's like, yeah, even if you think you can spot some truth or you have an opinion, my way of getting around this is just wait until you're asked. Otherwise, you end up handing out advice to people who didn't ask for it, and it's what right is it of mine to give you advice for something you didn't even ask for. However, Ross, if I come to you and ask you something, I would love it if you just told me, brutal or not, whether it's going to hurt me or not. I think I would respect and love it if you told me the truth to the answer to the question I asked. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Absolutely agree with that. Absolutely agree with that.
Which it served me well, but it's been a tough journey.
So you've had a mentor which has taken you through that journey and helped guide you through.
I've always had mentors because I needed them. I was very lost growing up. I didn't know what to do. So it's been natural for me to look for elders.
Are they always elder? Or
yeah,
they are. Okay.
Yeah, and they've always been troubled themselves and come out the other side.
So they've had that personal experience to guide through. They need to have got their hands dirty in that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I love a comeback story, Ross. I love a comeback story. So Jeff Thompson, who's a very spiritual man now, he's very violent. He used to be a doorman and a fighter. He used to bully his wife. He wasn't very nice, but his courage to put that on the page and talk about his faults and his jealousy and his rage and his anger, it's like I can relate to that because it's things I've experienced. So when he transforms, he's a tattooed guy who can fight. It means more coming from him than it would a guy with a PhD in a suit for me. And again, everyone's different and we'll relate in different ways, but I like guys who've been in the trenches and have got scars. And I think that's why a lot of people look up to Rob. And that's another reason why I think these people who are troubled are the best people to learn from. So I think it's very easy, especially for young guys now who are in a bit of trouble or maybe not living or following the right path. I'm like, they're the guys that we want to be helping right now and serving, not pushing to the side and saying they're a piece of shit. Because a lot of the guys I work with were troubled individuals. And now they're beautiful. They were always beautiful people. They just didn't know how to display it or how to show it. Historically, I've not been a good man. I still fuck up. But I've got a good heart.
We all do,
Yeah, but some display it in different ways, And there's some guys in prison who potentially just need a bit of love rather than confined to a cell.
And options. We have a very linear, non-flexible education system. Right?
We do.
We have different expectations put upon you in that, which is effectively ways in which the education system is there only to qualify how good the school is. That's why they put you through exams every two years from young age now with SATs and everything to take you through that. And if you're not getting you're seen to fail. Well, people are different. People have different abilities, and there's a big argument to say that the education system fundamentally is failing people because it's too focused on trying to optimize itself rather than it actually helping people to realize what their potential could be.
Sure, absolutely, I agree with that. And I think also if you want to be a compassionate person, it's it's worth doing the work on yourself, because when you see that you can be cruel, nasty, resentful, and all those things are within us all, you have more empathy for people that display those emotions, because it's very easy to be like us and them, like they're bad, I'm good. And in my experience, I have all those traits in me, good and bad, and I display both. So I kind of can see them in other people, and I think you can have more compassion that way. So again, it all starts with, going back to the community work, it all starts with looking within myself. Yeah. So now I'm more inclined to help the guy on the street who's homeless, because I'm like, oh, that could have been me. That could be me. I'm no better than this guy. And I think that helps me in my development, working on myself. Because before I used to walk past people and it was like, why doesn't he just get a job?
Yeah.
This guy sleep. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? No compassion, no thought. So I think going back and doing the work on myself, which is, again, has been another reason to put my smartphone down. It feels like a mission to show up as a better son, for example. You know, it's bigger than a goal. It's kind of knowing what you stand for, knowing the kind of man you want to be.
Yeah, but by doing that, you're getting affirmation, right? From not just yourself, but from others in the way. But you're getting affirmation because when you're doing that, you're feeling positive. You know, you've opted to make that change, and you're getting a consistent affirmation through that this is the right way to do things, because you're enjoying things. You're seeing more of your mum and dad. The way in which you are is different in how you operate, right? So that's consistent affirmation going through. I'm just saying that, you know, particularly with the phone, on those negative habits side of applications, that affirmation is reduced and reduced and reduced, because there's always another level, there's always another scroll, there's always another thing to watch, there's always another thing. And that inability to be able to shut off and stop and then do things which are more affirming is problematic. And that's just as much as I say, within the principles of how we design these things, as it is around the business models behind them, as it is around the stock price of what that company is due to the business model of how it then changes the habits of things. And you've got to realise everyone is manipulated by every single commercial company out there. That's the natural aspect of things. That's what we live with in capitalism. The phone is no different. It allows us to do amazing things and wonderful experiences. At the same time, it can be very, very negative and make us feel incredibly anxious and lead to all sorts of questionings about ourselves as an individual. And you've got to have great visibility of that. I would say, it's only because I've worked for 25 years in the business, and I've been, guilty of putting in things because they make good commercial sense rather than being great customer experiences. Now I just build things that are great customer experiences, great end user experiences, and try and ensure that we're not creating any negative habits with them. But it's so simple to do because there's lots of money in it, and it depends on what you're motivated by, right?
Does it ever test your values? Did you ever have you ever had a time in your career when you look and you think, I need to question what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, what are my motivators? Do you ever get caught out?
I think that I think I've been lucky to have worked with an amazing number of leaders who I've learned from directly as mentors, and great people in teams around me. So I've been super lucky to never feel that I'm doing something, because you know that everyone is. I've worked with my current team for well over a decade, and they'll tell you when you're off. They'll tell you when that's wrong, and I know tell you when that doesn't feel right, because there's a strong value we have in our company around being brave and being able to say those more brutal truths to work colleagues, which often in corporations you don't get because of the politics of how those things operate, right? Often corporations are more about the politics of how you represent yourself rather than doing the right thing. We're just down to do the right thing and do that, and people will catch on. Does it question your own individual? I look back at it, it's interesting you talk about, you know what you're going to regret on your deathbed. I've never done that exercise. I'd love to think about that there, base, because I don't know if I look back and I think, have I fulfilled everything that I possibly could do in my potential with what I've done in my career? The answer is probably not. I've made very distinct choices for what I thought at the time, and probably were good reasons. But have I done, what am I going to regret out of that? Could I have been doing, as I get older, I realise that a lot of what we've got to sort in this world is fundamental externalised problems. So I mentioned education, but you can talk about climate, you can talk about all sorts of things in terms of the society that we live in that is under intense pressure, and that's why I say people internalising themselves around phones is a negative to that, because we're not opening ourselves up to what's happening around us. And could I have done more around social enterprise and everything where my values lie quite strongly now? Yes, I probably could have done. So yeah, I think, but just questioning your own values full stop is a hard thing to do. You've got to work out that you've got values. You've got to work out that you've got a mission. I mean, for many years I've spent and talked about, my 5-year goals and what do I want to achieve in 5 years. And none of them have said, move out of the industry that I'm in at the moment. And I think I can make as much of a positive change in that industry and the work that I do as I can. Probably more so being in there than being on the outside sniping and looking into it. So I don't think anything I've ever done has made me, from a work perspective, has no, because I would have stopped, and other people would have stopped doing something which was potentially negative. Yeah, and I've worked for a gaming and gambling company, so I understood that, and there was an element of trying to make things fun. And then you understand that fun and enjoyment and dopamine are all linked into it, So that was probably the one thing I would look back on and say I probably could have spent that time doing something much more positive for myself and my society. It was a great experience. Don't get me wrong, great people I was working with as well. But that was probably the one thing I probably would look back on my deathbed and think, that's probably 3-4 years that I should have spent doing something a lot different.
Well, those values are important. I think the emphasis behind the 4,000 Weeks book is understanding that you're not going to be able to do everything, which is hard to accept. We talk about fulfilling potential and capitalising on everything, and then there's reality. Actually, you're not going to. Like, you have to basically get good at shutting doors and being okay with that in life, and maybe following the doors that are important to you. But when I look back, it's never really like bad business decisions I've made or anything like that. It's mainly around like the way I've treated people, for example, or how I've shown up as an individual. That's kind of where my biggest regrets lie. Like not spending enough time with my parents, for example, or not being nice enough to my parents when I'm with them. Because I can deal with fuck ups in business and stuff like that. Like you get over it, don't you? You move on. But there's certain things that probably will linger a bit harder, which again is one reason to keep going back and kind of putting a spotlight on those values. I think within yourself when you come off. I think a lot of depression lives there too, when people aren't living in alignment with that. Not always. But I think some people get these nudges, anxiety, depression, feeling down. I think sometimes they can be little alarm bells going, you might want to have a look at this, you might want to have a look at that. And it's easy to get dragged away. And again, one of the reasons why I keep harping on about this with the smartphone distraction, I just think all of that stuff, not just the smartphone, the Netflix, the gossip, the newspapers, takes us away from doing that important work.
Yeah. I think there's, we are awash with content.
Yes.
We're awash with things clamoring for our attention. And it takes, a lot of critical thought to work out what is good for you and what you want to do and what your values are.
Are you a deep thinker, Ross? Or do you sit there and contemplate?
Yeah, that's my job as a.
But about you?
Completely. The whole principle of strategy is just about writing a path of how you get to an end goal, a North Star. If you don't spend 80% of the time thinking about what that North Star is, then whatever you're going to is going to get you in the wrong direction, right? So you have to think about those things. And I probably don't think as much as I should do. But that's been, and there is actually no excuses for that at all. But I do often contemplate. And I think as I get older, I'm past 50 now, so I'm in a position whereby I think that really fundamentally changed me, which was like, okay, this is now no longer, middle age really. 50 is middle age, 50, but theoretically now we are counting down years, right?
Sure.
Right?
Well, I think the 4,000 weeks is that 82 years of age or 84 years of age is the average. So yeah, by the statistics.
Yeah, exactly. So by the statistics, you've gone past that. You've gone past the tipping point.
Sure.
Most definitively, right?
Yeah.
So So I've been doing a lot more thinking about that. A lot more thinking about what will make me and my immediate friends and family happier around that, and how I I think I'm a very different person than I was in my 40s,
Okay.
and a very different person than I was then in my 30s, and certainly a different person than I was in my 20s.
So just recently, then, that discovery that you're not going to be here forever, like how has it changed you? Like how does that show up in like everyday life and your relationships? What specifically has changed?
Well, I think I've probably become slightly better at saying no to things. I think the one thing that you forget is you have total agency over what you want to do and what you don't want to do. And I found in particular that I've spread myself over the last decade quite thin. I'm doing lots of things. I always talk about it like being a mile wide and an inch deep, and rather than an inch wide and a mile deep on certain things. And I think I've spread myself too thin across lots of different things, because so many interesting things, so many opportunities, so many great people. And you get to a point of of saying, oh God, I can't keep up with it all. I can't. And so I've become better at saying no, and I have to say no increasingly, I think, because there are but look, it's shiny. It's really shiny. It looks amazing. I really want to learn about that. So
things like this podcast.
Well, no, this podcast is great because it helps me self-reflect as well as being positive. But over lockdown, I got a little bit obsessed around trying to start to dig into really what the implications of, and trying to understand even some of the basic principles of quantum physics. Because so this is just so. But you sit there and you're dealing with stuff that just completely blew my mind to the point whereby I was reading it's like how to teach quantum physics to your dog. I think it's basic, and it started off, and then by the second chapter they're talking about the fact that life can be the light can be both particle and a wave, and it changes depending on how you observe it, right? And then you come down to you can't tell where something is and the speed it's going at the same time. You can't get locations, and so everything you know about this construct that we live in, our life, society, and it suddenly gets blown apart. And I haven't got anywhere near the capacity to even start to even scratch an iota of that area. But that was something which was quite interesting to challenge and think about, and change the way that you look at something, and reassess what that means, what you mean in this world of complete and utter inconsistencies and something that we don't even know. And so that also gives you, because I also think that to make changes and realizations around you as an individual, you have to have a certain amount of bravery about things to know stuff, and that you have to be able to question stuff consistently as to why does society tell me that? Why does society tell me it's okay to eat fast food or to get ready meals or whatever on the basis rather than cooking something? That's what get more nutrients, better protein, better calories in terms of what we cook versus what we go to their base. But it's been made easier and simpler. The fact of this is about bravery in terms of being able to say, right, in quantum physics, the whole construct around our world is completely wrong. Everything we know is completely wrong. Or not completely wrong, or we're discovering really more about the layers underneath it and what's really driving it, to the point whereby it's fine for the richest man in the world to stand up and say we are probably living in a simulation, right? And as Musk did, based on some amazing philosophy which talks about the chances of being in a simulation or not. That's really brave stuff to start thinking about. And if you start questioning that, then you start questioning what am I then doing on an individual iota particle level versus everything else out there, everything that's broader out there, and everything that we consider to be the normality that we have to look to is not the normality, and we can change ourselves to do that. So that's been my sort of like 50s so far, thinking about stuff like that. That actually everything that we think is capitalism, right? Does religion have a place with spirituality? Big questions that because society says, and by society I'm doing the inverted commas, society says that this is the way that it should be. This is the way. This is the truth. This is based on huge amounts of understanding or learning or education. Doesn't mean it's what it actually is. And so that gives me then bravery to start questioning things a little bit more about my own person. And I think I'm just on that start of that journey. I have to find a mentor on it, though. You're absolutely right. I have to find someone to be able to help me guide through on that.
Well, I'm fascinated by what you've just said, and I dived deep into some of these questions too. I'm still yet to know if it's a benefit to me or not. I think there's only so much truth we can handle, And the idea, for example, of the simulation, it's quite terrifying, because does that mean everything's deterministic? You know, is it mapped out? If it's a simulation, you know, is it done? Is my path there etched into stone? Those kind of things, you know, this debate between free will. Fascinating and great conversation, great debate. I love talking about it. Sometimes I do question, does it drag me away from actually living my life? You know, or can you dedicate your life to a world of being curious, you know, a lifetime of being curious and just having fun? I think one of the things I'm guilty of, Ross, is I kind of always think it has to have its own product. Like, why am I doing this? Sometimes I just want to learn about quantum physics. Do you know what I mean? It's sometimes as easy as that. And I think attaching a meaning to everything that we do can be a little bit dangerous too. So there's a time and a place where picking up your phone and having 10 minutes of YouTube, it's good. It's recovery. It's fine. But yeah, it makes hard. This is complex stuff we're talking about. There's no right. There's no wrong. But I think there's a thirst and a desire for a lot of people like ourselves just to learn. And drag as much as we can out of our time on the planet. So we end up doing everything, like you say, and wanting to learn everything and wanting to know everything. And but again, podcasting is great because me and you can squeeze the shit out of a 90-minute conversation. And we've talked about a lot of things, but I'm like hearing you say things that nobody else on the planet will say. So I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
That only you have these thoughts and opinions and feelings. Only you.
But that's consciousness, right? That's the very principle of consciousness.
Sure.
Self-realization of consciousness, that we are conscious beings.
Sure.
That we have these things and we can say these type of things.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that same conscious feeling, though, is the thing that can drive you to suicide, because you know the reality. That consciousness might be the thing that realizes that you discover it's a simulation. Do you know what I mean? It's the thing that tells us we know we're going to die, but it's also the thing that kind of makes life beautiful too. So there's a lot of things that are a blessing and a curse, and it's I guess maybe you could argue where you put your attention and what you do with that conscious level. I don't know. I'm like you. I'm curious to learn and know more.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a simple answer to that, but it's probably not mindlessly scrolling on your phone, I would say, right? I mean, unless it gives you. I'm a big believer in the value of serendipity, right? And one of the things I find is that you're reading news on the phone. And you sit there, and it's not the same as reading using a newspaper. Because when you used to open a newspaper, your eyes would catch things that you wouldn't normally see, and the ability to go off and spark off into that direction, or look at this, or learn a little bit about that, and everything was there. Serendipity is this wonderful opportunity for us to start to discover. And most of our days we spend completely oblivious to. We get something like 5,000 commercial messages hit us every single day, right? 5,000 ads hit us. That could be a poster, that can be an advert on YouTube, or whatever it might well be. But the point is, we only probably explore, I don't know, one, maybe less than that a day of that. All of that is an element of serendipity. Or going into a bookstore. I think walk into a bookstore, and I'm not very good at mission shopping. I like to browse a great deal. Well, I've got no idea. Right? It's brilliant, because I could pick up something and say, that's a crime story, that's an ecological drama, or whatever. That's a factual book about lighthouses. I've got no idea. I'm picking stuff up, and it's just like the serendipity of finding something that, that's actually what I want to explore today, type of thing. And that's a big, big thing that you've got agency to change your habits, but the applications that we have just simply are not sort of serendipitous in terms of how they bring content to you. In fact, they narrow you down so that everything affirms that in your echo chamber about what you like. It's very difficult. Everything happens. Pinterest does it this way. TikTok does it this way. Instagram does it. They all narrow us down into these little worlds that we're happy with, and then that's where things start to bubble away, because we're self-affirmed by people around us that might not have the right intentions, and so on and so forth. So that's a problem. So back to serendipity, back to more opportunity to find stuff out, going and doing things that you wouldn't normally do, pushing yourself in the basis. It's brilliant. Do you go to the Petroculture at all? So Leamington's got a great one which goes on, and there you're hearing from normal people talking for, I forgot what it is. Is it 10 minutes or something, or 2 minutes or something? Anyway, the format is that people getting up talking about, someone will be talking around taking part in a round the world clipper race, someone will be talking about growing mushrooms, someone will be going about just things which you wouldn't normally explore, and those are serendipitous in terms of things that affect us, and it puts us out of a comfort zone that we might have.
Sure, I think what you've just done there is kind of I've never really thought about the impact of these echo chambers. So I consume a lot of the same content, you know, self-development, mission build, all that, and all my then conversation is directed towards that. And now you've got me thinking, like, how much of my life is just this tunnel vision of what I absorb online and what I read. So if I go into Waterstones, for example, I'll go straight to self-help and spirituality. I don't even look at the fiction work there, because, like I say, my world has stemmed from the information that I consume. And even in this vast library of books, I still go to exactly what I know.
Yeah.
And I think something now that I can now work on from this conversation is maybe just parking that and having a look what else is there. Yeah. It's almost like you got the blinkers on. You don't, do you know what I mean? I don't even look what's there, because here's my narrative, here's my story. But again, it's a bit hypocritical, isn't it? Because before we're saying, well, you can't do everything, you can't learn everything. So it's one of those weird paradoxes where, like, yeah, it's kind of, yeah, it's balancing the exploration, but also becoming sometimes like good at what you do and what you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I have a thing where I don't like going into grocery stores that I don't know, because I don't know where the things are.
Yeah, it's a ball ache. Yeah.
Right, absolute ball ache. Right, completely. I don't know if that's a male thing.
John, I think it's a
get it.
Oh, really? Maybe it's a male thing.
I mean,
yeah, it drives me insane. It was,
you know, it's absolutely madness. And Waterstones just recently reorganised.
Okay.
Now I don't know where anything is in Waterstones. That's where I normally go, right? So there's sort of forced serendipity, right? And then there's the opportunity to go and explore certain stuff. You know, it's like having choice is positive and negative, right?
Absolutely.
And so I quite like the fact that Spotify will recommend a load of new tracks for me that I didn't know, because about what I've been, the stuff that I've been listening to, or new podcasts or stuff like that, right? I'm quite happy with that. That's something to do. Shouldn't stop me from also exploring in other ways.
Sure.
What's happening? What friends tell me that's the music I should maybe listen to and check out. And it doesn't stop me from listening to the stuff I know I love, right? It's about balance, because choice is both, you know, if I go onto Netflix, there are, I don't know, God knows how many, 5 million things to go and watch.
Have you ever had like a movie night and then spent the entire night trying to work out what you're going to watch?
Every single time.
Yeah, it drives me nuts.
Every
Spotify, I'm a flicker now. I like song to song, so you know, 30 seconds. And I've realised, and again, there's some good books that say before you sit down and watch Netflix, like literally, I know this is sad, like write down what film you're going to watch and decide. Because I'll spend the entire evening just deciding what to watch and watch nothing. Yeah. Quite sad, really. Yeah. And sometimes I've got my phone in my hand, so I've got my phone and Netflix. All these things that I was really good at avoiding, and now they just seem to just stroll in. You have to catch yourself all the time. Jeff says to me, every day you have to wake up and win your will, every single day. So like, what you did,
phrase.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
That's a good phrase.
So what you did yesterday is kind of irrelevant. Like, you still have to get up and do the work, because I think we assume we've cracked it, or we're at that level now where we don't have to watch our behaviour. And I'm like, shit, man.
I really like that.
Yeah, check him out, Jeff Thompson, phenomenal.
Already, I'm fascinated to hear his story.
His latest work's very spiritual, very deep. He's gone super spiritual. So I'll recommend something. I'll send you a book,
but there's a lot to be said, in particular around when we talk about spirituality. There's a lot to be said for the effect that has in terms of exploration of yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how you relate to things, whether you articulate that as a god, or whether you articulate it as a formal religion, or whether you articulate it as a way of being able to get closer in your body through yoga and the basis of that, not just being a physical thing, but absolutely being a spiritual and a breathing side of things. All those things are about ways of different exploring things. And I think people just need to be able to try stuff, and they have the opportunity to try stuff.
Yeah, but you've used the word brave. I think that's what it takes, a lot of courage, because one, you learn things about yourself, and then you have to question things. You might have had a thought pattern for 40 or 50 years that no longer serves you, and to eliminate that from your life is really difficult. I have a lot of therapy, and a lot of the work is destroying some of the unhelpful thought patterns that I've worked so hard to protect. And I will fight tooth and nail to keep these values that do not serve me, because they're part of me. Even though they are harming me, it's like to let go of them is really difficult.
So my son is doing psychology at uni, and he said to me a couple of times ago when he was back, he said to me that I believe that everyone should have therapy. I've never had therapy.
Okay, you never had therapy?
I've never had therapy. I tell a lie. I had one session where I was referred to by a doctor. I was going through some difficult issues at work when I was quite young, and I was referred to a doctor for someone to look at depression.
Yeah.
And I went into and basically I think I just got scarred. I don't know. It was just a bad experience for me. They just said you've got to just turn around and look around you and everything. And everybody's like, that doesn't really help me at the moment. I need to be able to deal with this, and this. So I've never had therapy at all. And
Okay,
I think
that's interesting. Why does your son believe everyone should have it?
Because he thinks it's incredibly positive.
Okay.
He thinks it's an absolute. It's not like everyone's mad and must have therapy.
Yeah.
No. He thinks it's incredibly positive because of that very concept of exploration.
Yeah.
That very concept, of being able to counter what you had as trained thoughts and habits and activity that you do in yourself and the values that you hold and everything that might not be positive for you. And this is where you come from. You come from. We're a certain amount nature, but a certain amount nurture, and what comes in that nurturing side of things is not relevant. I mean, you look at the way in which society has changed, how its viewpoints are on gender, on diversity, on inclusion. We're getting to a point now whereby everyone is slowly, finally realizing that everyone is equal. Right? Doesn't matter about you at all, but getting people to that point, they've got a load of preconceptions that they come through, particularly which is nurtured out of how they've been growing up and who they've grown up with in the basis. Not blaming families here, but I'm talking about the whole social circle around you that should be countered. And how do you counter those things? Do you expect them to counter themselves, take responsibility? Ultimately, that would be lovely if everyone did that. But as far as I can understand, therapy starts to begin to explore some of the things which do that. I'm having never done it. How's it work for you?
Well, I've had it for a long time, so you could argue that perhaps you shouldn't need such lengthy periods of therapy. But I think I felt like I needed direction that I couldn't find anywhere else. But I think again, a therapist will help you reframe things, because in my head, this is how things are. This is the world. This is the truth. And sometimes you need somebody outside of your own head to help you reframe certain things. So I found it very interesting. I found it very beneficial for my own work, for what I do. It helps that I'm fascinated by human behavior. So kind of like I see myself as a little project. So it's been very helpful. I've had some not so good experiences, and then I cling on to a good therapist when I find one, like the last one that I'm seeing. I've had him for 2.5 years. He's great. It's very challenging, but I enjoy it. But I'm passionate about the topic. Back in the day, I think it was slightly different. It was like you only went to therapy if you were fucking nuts. And if you were in therapy, you didn't tell anyone. It was something to be ashamed about. But even this is some form of therapy for me, because I'm learning and digging, and you're teaching me things, and we're exploring. So I see it as a really healthy thing to do. And I want my mind to be expanded. I don't want to shut down anymore. I want to hear your opinion, and I want to learn from you. And you could argue that therapy has got me to this stage where I'm happy to explore now, and I'm not so scared of it. In fact, I welcome it, so I can have the ability, because I'm not qualified, I'm not academic or anything, but I feel like I can hold good conversation now.
Look, you don't have to have qualifications in order to be able to be able to articulate your thoughts, do you? I mean, it comes down to
no.
You need to be able to organise them. You need to be able to be critical of them. You need to be able to understand what's important and the prioritisation of them. But
I think you can only speak clearly, Ross, if you have done the work. And does that make sense? So you kind of get things inside in some form of format and in order, so you kind of know what you believe.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Does that make sense? And then I can speak to you, rightly or wrongly, what I'm saying. At least I'm clear, because this is how I've processed things in my head. And therapy is a very useful tool to allow you to do that. Plus, it's good to dump your shit out of your head and get it out. And sometimes, and I think you got to be careful here, I think people feel instantly better because they've just offloaded. It doesn't fix things, but it's a nice feeling.
You need to take some things back and work on them and see what. So, would you see therapists as some of the good ones that you've had in particular as mentors on the journey?
Yeah, I do know. Yeah.
Sort of facilitators helping you in order to be able to.
Yeah, he's an older guy. He's an older guy. I like older men teaching me the way. I think this is something that's gone very wrong in the world today. That we don't have leaders. We don't have strong leaders anymore. Or the leaders that we do have, i.e. government, the wrong role models, the wrong leaders with that integrity. So I kind of look around and I gauge who I think's got integrity and honour, and I want them to teach me how to be a better person. yeah, that's it. And then I can teach my youngers, or if I'm lucky enough to have children one day, perhaps. So yeah, I kind of, that's quite natural in me though. It's not something I've had to work hard on. I've always sought out mentors.
Yeah.
So, and it frustrates me, Ross, that something I struggle with is thinking that other people should think like me.
Well, I'll come back to that. The point I made earlier on about perception, right?
Sure.
On the basis that that's your perception.
Sure.
It's a real. I mean, you are backed up by the annals of history in terms of everyone's had mentors through there, and people who lead, and from the greatest philosophers having their philosophers above them, all the way through to artists, through creators. Everyone has mentors. Everyone looks up to people. Everyone wants to learn from people on a basis. Everyone wants to explore things and look at it, but they've got to have the urge and the passion to do that. And it's how you spark the passion in people, which is the thing, because otherwise you just default. And that's what the smartphone stuff is about. Is it's a default to something that is maybe not challenging in any shape or format, but just comforting. It's like, what's your default food when you want comfort?
Pizza,
right? Ice cream, yeah, on a basis.
And
yeah.
ice cream. Pizza, it's those two things.
In sequence, I hope, not together. Not together.
No, pizza, then ice cream every time. Yeah.
Do you have pineapple on pizza?
No,
thank
no,
God
that'd be
for
stupid. Yeah.
Jeez, I was about to walk out from here and the pizza there. Not being a pineapple.
No.
The world is basically split into people who have pineapple.
Yeah, I know.
Pizza,
Yeah, see, I don't get those people either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But sorry, I confused myself as to where we were. That sort of concept of going back to comfort is what you do on a smartphone, right? You go back into comfort. You go back and do the things that make you feel, a little cosseted and little comfy in a way. And maybe it's because we don't have the ability to talk to people in the same way. I mean, I'm very interested because I only hear positive things about therapy, and how it can help and how it can begin to explore things that you wouldn't normally explore yourself. Now, some people I'm sure have got the ability to be able to explore them themselves, although you get a very closed view, I think, probably perception-wise, and it becomes harder to change things. So I think the idea of mentors and the principle of being constantly, and therapy it's a charged word, right? Isn't it? Because of that. Well, particularly, I'm probably now. If I look back to 50 years before I was born, therapy was electric shocks and and mental asylums and things and everything, come down to what are medical problems. And so we've come on a massive way in the last 100 years. But therapy is basically being able to explore and counter and do things in a critical thought manner, I would say, on the basis. And that's something which mentors are doing, the same type of job.
Yeah. Yeah,
I think those are really interesting. I'm going to take those both away with me to explore more.
Yeah.
When I look back at myself on the basis, because that's something I should probably look at rather than quantum physics, because I'm more likely to get some value out of it.
I don't know. All of these big problems in the world, I always bring back to myself. So even the homelessness and climate change, I'm like, well, what can I do? And I think therapy's taught me that. So I think generational change starts with me. It starts with you. And I know that might be a hard concept for people to grasp. Well, just because I changed, nothing else is going to change. But I believe that's the only way out of a new way of living, is each man steps up, takes responsibility. So we have leaders, and they teach people under them, and we pass on the good.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I just think we've got that a little bit backwards. So I see it as my responsibility and duty to try and work with the guys and help them stay on a strong path, not a comfortable path, a strong path. And things are happening to their families now that are just incredible. They're changing their family's life due to their own behaviour and leadership.
It's remarkable.
And self-responsibility. So I can see the impact of an individual doing the work on themselves, on how it can really kind of affect the world and the spider web that kind of like is covering the planet. I get it. So I'm like, well, that's all I can do.
Yeah. Ultimately, that's all we can do, unless we want to go and put ourselves up for positions elsewhere to try and help it on a more mass scale. I mean, I look at every single teacher, every single nurse, every single doctor trying to help in the ways which they're doing, right?
Yeah.
They're doing that on a mass scale, completely without judgment on these things. I think that is remarkable. I think the systems let them down.
Sure, and the world needs people like that again. But I would still go back to even those people need to work hard on themselves, because especially those people, because they're interacting with high numbers of people, so they kind of need to be our role models and our leaders. This way, I try not to get too judgmental, but even like a doctor, if he's promoting health, for me, he should be healthy, just like a personal trainer should. And there's a lot of personal trainers that aren't in good health and shit, and I don't get it. It's like, you're the leaders. I think it's a higher standard of living, and it can seem quite cold and judgmental, but I feel like our standards have dropped, and it's okay to scroll and sit there with our head in the phone, and it's okay to be 6 stone overweight, and it's okay to be cruel, and I don't think that's a good way to create a nice world to live in. But I think the answer to get there is going to be with some harsh direction and some tough times and a change where we all step forward and take a bit more personal responsibility for what we do and how we bring up our kids. But I can't ever see that occurring. I think that's the thing. It's hard not to get cynical. It's really hard not to get cynical, because you can easily go, we're fucked.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot of negatives towards civilization, doomsday clock, war, climate, everything going forward, which makes it an incredibly difficult place at the moment. The world, with lots and lots of people suffering, massively out of it.
Unnecessarily too. I think that's the painful thing, Ross. Some of it is unnecessary. We have contributed towards that.
We've totally. We've lost we lost a long time ago the opportunity to, and the privilege that we had of being where we are.
Yes.
Who we are on as well. We lost a long time on that basis, and so there is the cynical view will be that there are it's now just about making money, and that's what the focus is. And so, and you can roll that back to the 80s. Wasn't that way beforehand?
No, but I think this is what happens when the world is run by what I would call weak individuals, not with the right values or interests in place.
Oh, definitely motivated in different ways than there should be in a basis. But again, back to that, my argument is that a lot of those people, I think, are motivated by the sovereign individual and what they're doing, rather than thinking about the community at large. I'm not saying that having sovereignty over yourself is wrong on any basis, but when you start to project that out in terms of power coming on the basis, it becomes really, really hard.
Yeah, well, if you think like in some of the countries like Russia and North Korea, what they try and do is eliminate that from the individual. So they try and take your sovereignty away from you and say, no, this is how you live, this is how you do things, and that's terrible. That's where we see all these troubles happening. But that's where, because they know that's where the power lies, in the individual's right to do and express themselves.
That's a really interesting area, because now you get into the democracy is not necessarily the best political system for us to have on the basis. One could argue that benign dictatorship could well be, when it comes down to it, because people don't want the choice. There's a brilliant Dudley Moore and Peter Cook film, which I cannot remember what the title of it is, but in effect what they do is they give people choice over voting.
Yeah,
this is back in the 50s, 60s. They give people voting through their TV, and effectively they gain total dictatorship over people, because people can become too bothered to vote. Right? Mm-hmm. People have got to. You talk about awareness and responsibility. People have got to be able to step up to that.
Absolutely, I
fundamentally,
agree.
Because we were in a situation. If only 70% of people vote, or 60% of people vote, or 30% of people vote in a council election, you can't complain about anything if you haven't taken part in being able to make something change.
No, autonomy comes with a hell of a lot of responsibility. Too much for a lot of people. They're not ready for freedom and responsibility.
But how we do that should be what we should be teaching in education. How to take responsibility, how to be able to have critical thought, how to just work out whether something is factually right or wrong.
I agree.
I mean, the smartphone has brought us this fake news and everything. It's difficult to believe anything now which is written, apart from everything's written with bias anyway, right? Always has been. But how do you believe that that's actually right?
I don't vote, and two things. I made the pact that I wouldn't moan about anything because I haven't voted, so I can't say a word. Fair. And two, I don't trust the information that is fed to me. So if I'm delivered some news about a political party's intentions, I've become very cynical about the genuineness and truthfulness behind it. So where am I getting my information? Who's this paper aligned with?
Yeah, completely, yeah.
So I kind of have took, I guess you could call it the escape route, and just thought, fuck it, I'm not getting involved, rightly or wrongly. But yeah, I can
Please vote. Please vote. I tell you what.
When I look at it, it's like having 3 meals in front of me that I fucking hate all 3 meals, and I'm like, well, that tastes rank, that's disgusting, and that's horrible.
So what's the one that's going to do the best for society?
Well, before I answer that, I would have to go away and do some homework.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, my mum and dad are hard Labour voters, right? So they're aligned to a party, not necessarily ideas and concepts. Yeah. So they're like, red is good, blue is bad. And I don't want to be like that. So I'm more willing to listen to what the policies are. So but I wouldn't even know who to vote for. My point is, where do I find the information about the policies that these people are?
Right, and therein lies the issue, which is the manifestos and the party political broadcasts, which is the marketing of the manifesto and everything, might not really reflect really what the policy is. Or if it does, it's actually very, very dense and very difficult to go through on a basis.
Sure.
I'm not a big lover of dumbing things down, but I am a big lover of having simplicity behind stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, I think voting is. I wouldn't go as far as to say I think it should be made. I think everyone in this country should legally vote, but I do believe that there is the ability to be able to think about society as a whole by looking at. We have infantilized it. Yeah, made it like simple, like children on the basis. Is it blue? Is it red? Is it for the individual? Is it for the society? Ultimately. We've got to make choices for everybody out there. We've got to make choices about transportation, energy, health, crime. We've got to make choices about how we want to live as a society, and we need to be able to articulate that. And the only way which we have power over doing that is being able to vote. And so it is. This is what fundamentally. I mean, I come from a world of advertising and marketing, so I shouldn't be surprised by it. But fundamentally, if you look at Brexit and you look at the absolute tosh that was talked about on both sides of the part, but in particular I'm thinking of red buses with 350 from NHS on the side of it, right? That was false news, totally, and people believe it because they haven't taken the critical thought to actually examine it. I think that citizenship, which is what ultimately, that's to me a fundamental part of the curriculum should be with regards to education, that we should all understand what being a citizen does and means to us. And part of that is being able to to ensure that we are informed of the options to be able to cast a vote for who is going to be our leaders on that basis.
Yeah, and I'm very careful about what I say here because I don't want to complain because I'm not willing to do the work to study and to find out more, and I'm not voting, so my right to complain. If I was to complain and I wasn't going to vote, then it would be surely, and Jordan Peterson says this all the time, like some people need to step up to fill that gap, otherwise your right to complain is diminished. So the problem is the brave people that sit here and go, well, politics is bullshit and all governments are corrupt, is like somebody has to fill the gap so that the corruption doesn't grow. So we need the good people to step up and go, yeah, this is bullshit. Here's how we can really help. But there's not many people willing to do that.
I agree.
And I'm one of them. I'm not willing to go there. I'm probably narcissistically stuck in my own little world, and that's all that matters. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely something whereby I think this conversation's been super interesting with regards to the individual and the role of the individual and the sovereignty that the individual has and the ability of the individual to change things, right? Versus the impact that you have on wider and smaller society, large and small s, right? And within that, the agents that we use, I'm talking about smartphone as an agent that we use within this, and how that operates. The smartphone, people should be doing. I'm not suggesting that political parties should even begin to start doing their manifestos via TikTok. I'm not suggesting that type of naffness. I'm just suggesting that there's a better way of trying to be able to engage people to understand them. What worries me most is that most people live and spend their time in a very, very small locality, right? And that is our local community, the people on our street, on the neighbours and everything, right? Yet we care less about what happens in our local society than we do on the national So when you look at voting, because consistently local elections are worse turnouts than national elections. And then even worse than that, when we were part of the EU, we didn't really care about what was happening in the EU either, because so we voted down, very, very small amounts in there. And that's a worry. I actually feel, from talking to a little bit to people who are generations younger than I am, that there is more of an understanding of the responsibility that they have in order to be able to be more aware of politics and what is being said. I don't think the politicians make it very easy to like or to access really what they mean.
Sure, they don't seem like relatable people to me. Most politicians. No, but again, I'm out of my depth here.
Well, yes, but I believe that would be a great example of what could we do with the smartphone to enable people to have the choice to engage, and then to be able to engage with politics in a different way. Yeah, which I think is probably more important than looking at cat videos.
Yeah. Absolutely, but conversations like this too are really healthy and good. I haven't even touched on the topic of politics in 75 episodes of this.
Sorry to drag it into the wider area.
No,
away from the smartphone.
Look, you are a super interesting guy. I've absolutely loved every minute of this podcast, and this is what I'm here for: to be challenged and educated, and to have my mind open to new things. So, there's a tradition. We'll wrap this up now because we've been chatting for an hour and 40. Believe it or not,
I can't believe that.
Okay. By the way, you've been superb. I've loved it.
It's been great.
I hope you've had fun.
No, because it's been it's a two-way thing. It's a dialogue. Yeah, I've learned a great deal out of this. I'm going to take so many things away from this, which is fantastic, because
awesome.
That's what it's meant to be. It's not just about
Well, you're very good at listening too, which helps.
Well, that's a skill you have to learn.
It is a skill.
It's
exactly
an
that.
absolute skill you have to learn.
Yeah.
When I was talking about what I do now in my 50s versus what I do in my 20s. You got 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth. Use them in that proportion, please.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, traditional question then. I think you've kind of touched upon this actually, but I'll hit you with it again. What do you feel like you need to work on now in order to become a better man?
Oh, that's a good question.
I saved these good questions right.
No, they're great. So lockdown was a big change for me, and I changed the way which I worked, changed the way that we all interacted. Everything changed, right? I stopped from going to London 4 days a week, and I was back in remote, and I concentrated a lot more on me. Mm-hmm. So at the time, I lost about 25 kilograms, and
wow.
was doing a lot more cardio.
Kept that
and
quiet.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
Well,
the problem is now it's all gone back to normality. I'm back up about 12, I think, on a basis. So
don't let it be 25.
Well, no. That's the thing. So for me to be a better man, it's to be definitively more present and more understanding what I need to do now with my body in particular.
Okay.
That's definitely where it is. But being more present, it's been interesting. My kids are 19 and 18, so they're adults now.
Yeah.
I don't know what my kids. My adult.
That'll always be your kids or us. I'm 38. I'm still a kid with my mum and dad. Trust me.
And I often wonder if I've been as present for them as I need to be. I hope I have been, but I think definitely being more present is something that I can definitely work on more.
That's awesome. I've loved today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed.
I think you're a great guy. I've loved it.
Oh, it's been fantastic. Thanks very much indeed.
You're very welcome. Now I've just got the anxiety of making sure the video and the audios come out all right. So talking about anxiety.
Okay, right. Okay,
God,
you have to go through that the whole time, do you, in terms of that anxiety?
I try not to let it to affect the podcast, but I'm like, please, especially if it's a great podcast like this, and part of my attention just goes to, is it recording? Is it recording? Is everything okay? But let's find out. Mate, thank you.
My goodness, that